the drive for the merger between NZME and Fairfax and the closure of regional dailies. So if the public isn't going to fund some sort of regional news, I suspect we'd be seeing a lot less of it. Now, Gavin's point, I think, is well made, but the question is, well, if we're worried about the quality of regional news and the level of subsidy that they're getting, is the argument to say that we shouldn't be subsidising this, or is the argument that we should be putting a lot more money into this and making sure the quality is of a high standard?
Rather than maybe money lightly sprinkled over a lot of providers to sometimes no effect, not much effect?
I don't know if the diversity of the providers is the problem necessarily. Perhaps you could argue that the coherence of the material that's produced with this funding, could perhaps be better coordinated. I mean, and I think if we look at this on what I would call an ecological level, if you look at the overall level of funding for regional news production, whether or not that there's scope within that to create a slightly more coordinated approach, whereby perhaps there was syndication across different news providers, where you could share news, perhaps collate it into a single channel or a single portal, so that all the regional news media collaborated and shared information. Perhaps that would create a greater level of consistency. But if in the short term, though, I think the big problem is that New Zealand Air, like RNZ, has had virtually a decade of frozen funding. So, they've had to cut back on what they can fund regionally. There was funding available for some smaller regional TV stations that got cut, Mainland TV, for example, Nelson, a few years ago. We know that RNZ has also had to restrict what it can do regionally. So this is fundamentally a problem of chronic underfunding.
Janet, I know this is your area too.
And I'm wondering whether, Peter, this is a situation where these voices need to be heard in this area, but in this age of convergence, we are not getting people, we're getting print people doing telly. And we're getting people who maybe don't have and if you read Gavin's comments, it seems to me that some of the content is fine. It's the lack of professionalism within that content that is the issue for him. But surely with continued experience, that's going to improve. Yeah,
but do you need sustained funding and more quality control applied?
My view, you need sustained funding to maintain capacity.
Yes.
You need to develop that talent. So and that needs not just funding for regional productions by local firms, but you need funding for regional productions by the mainstream media too. And I'm sure there's ways that they could work together. I mean, in that sense, I think it's quite interesting that the Ministerial Advisory Group, in its recent documentation, has recommended doing research into collaboration, across the public sector to see whether there's ways in which that kind of production could be better served.
Peter, thank you for your input. Dr. Peter Thompson on that one. And Ganesh, I'm conscious of the fact that I haven't actually asked you for a view on this.
That's all right. To me, it depends. The whole issue depends on how much we consider these products, the regional news. It's whether it's a public good and what value we get. And if you're an economist, why isn't the ordinary person prepared to pay for it? And should we just be driven by those short-term dollars, or should we actually, as was indicated, put the effort in to maintain funding over a period of time to build that base?
Very good. And I'll let you have the last word, Ganesh Nana. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And that's the end of the panel. Janet Wilson, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
And we're back tomorrow. Here's Checkpoint, everybody.
Tō te mairai, hoa mai, he kōrero, kei te haere, he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Thank you for joining us. Tonight on Checkpoint, the government says contract workers need greater protection. We speak to an SOE that uses hundreds of them. Why aren't they employees? And do they have minimum income levels? And if so, how much? We also look back at what we've learned about contract workers in New Zealand and the protections they do and don't have. Also tonight, 12 boys and their soccer coach rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand make their first appearance and share extraordinary details of their time underground, including an attempt to dig their way out. Donald Trump publicly points the finger at Vladimir Putin, and Dunedin's ambitious plan for its waterfront receives a shot in the arm from the government.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Regional Economic Development Minister, Shane Jones, says the South Island has got less so far from his $3 billion fund because councils there have been slower in coming forward with ideas. He said the $800,000 he's announced for Dunedin's waterfront is just the start of the government's plans for the mainland. The money is for a feasibility study and business case for redeveloping the waterfront. Mr Jones says claims most of his multi-billion-dollar provincial growth fund is for the North Island are unfair.
Perhaps it's because you're of Scottish ancestry, or you live in a slightly more chilly climate. Us temperate Dalmatian Maoris, at the prospect of a fiscal feast, we are aroused a lot more quickly than you Southerners, it would appear.
Shane Jones is promising more money to promote engineering in Dunedin and for another project in Invercargill. An organisation that supports victims of child sex abuse in state care says the Australian government should pay compensation to victims regardless of where they live. A New Zealander who was abused in Australian state care is unable to access up to $150,000 in compensation after being deported. The man, who RNZ News is only identifying as John, was put into an Australian state care facility at 11 and was legally made a ward of the state 2 years later. It was while in state care that John was sexually abused. Later in life, John was jailed for drugs offences and then sent to a detention centre for 16 months before being deported. Care Leavers Australasia says if people were sexually abused in an institution, then they deserve compensation wherever they are now. The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is calling on the Pope to sack the Archbishop of Adelaide. Philip Wilson is the most senior Catholic in the world to be convicted of concealing child sex abuse. Earlier this month, he was sentenced to 12 months detention, but has refused to quit his post and plans to appeal his conviction. Mr Turnbull says the time has come for the Pope to intervene.
He should have resigned, and the time has come for the Pope to sack him. If he is not, there are many leaders that have called on him to resign. It's clear that he should resign, and I think its time has come now for the ultimate authority in the Church to take action and sack him.
The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. A Nelson cardiologist has lost his 6-month-long battle to stop his name being published after he was convicted of secretly filming women using the toilet. Sam Wilson was sentenced to 7 months home detention in January after pleading guilty to 8 charges. Conan Young reports.
The charges involved making intimate visual recordings of women in a toilet or changing room at Nelson Hospital and in a toilet at his home. Dr Wilson appealed the decision to waive his name suppression to the High Court. Today, Justice David Collins upheld the original decision, allowing his name to be published. The judge says while doing this would cause distress to the surgeon's family, this fell well short of causing Wilson extreme hardship. Justice Collins says not naming him would unfairly cast a cloud of suspicion over other Nelson health professionals. Ko Conan Young Tēnei.
The Police Association says there are a lot of lessons to be learnt from a siege near Kawerau where 4 officers were shot. The Independent Police Conduct Authority has criticised police for how they handled a search of Rhys Warren's Bay of Plenty home in 2016. 3 officers were shot by Warren as they entered his home, and he shot a 4th later. The Police Association President, Chris Cahill, says the IPCA can look at matters in hindsight when things have settled down.
The officers are having to make decisions in very fast-moving and volatile situations. And the great thing here that the officers were hurt, no tragedy resulted. But they've learnt some really valuable lessons, and look, those lessons have been pointed out by the IPCA and have been put into practice already.
Police Association President Chris Cahill. Auckland households will pay an average of $2,500 in rates this year. The Auckland Council today announced a 2.5% general increase in rates for the year. There'll also be 2 new targeted taxes for stormwater infrastructure and the environment. However, the bill for these will be offset by the scrapping of a transport levy worth the same amount. Sevi Road in Lower Hutt is likely to remain closed until tomorrow as firefighters deal with a fire at a scrap metal yard. Fire and emergency were called to the scene in Seaview about 6:45 this morning. The fire caused huge plumes of toxic smoke to cover Lower Hutt. The council says it's possible the road will remain closed tomorrow morning and people heading to Eastbourne and the eastern bays will need to take alternate routes. It's 5:05. Sport. The Crusaders and Highlanders have both bolstered their teams for their respective Super Rugby quarterfinals on Saturday. Hosting the South African side, the Sharks in Christchurch, the defending champion Crusaders have the All Blacks trio of front rowers Owen Franks, Cody Taylor and lock Scott Barrett back in their starting lineup. Bryn Hall starts at halfback ahead of Mitchell Drummond, while David Havili replaces Israel Dagg at fullback. The Highlanders, whose quarter-final against the Waratahs in Sydney, have All Blacks Ben Smith, Aaron Smith, Luke Whitelock and Elliot Dixon all returning, along with co-captain Ash Dixon and centre Rob Thompson. Meanwhile, the Hurricanes captain Brad Shields has confirmed he'll play in tomorrow's quarter-final against the Chiefs after successfully recovering from a rib injury. The New Zealand golfer Michael Hendry admits adjusting to the course at Carnoustie for this week's British Open will be a challenge. The 2017 New Zealand Open champion will play his second straight Open championship after qualifying in Japan, where he plies his trade. Hendry says the links layout in Scotland is a lot different to what he's used to.
It was a lot drier and a lot harder and faster than I was expecting, so it's definitely going to play a little bit different to what I've been used to in the last little while. Japan never gets us firm, so have to make some adjustments, but just looking forward to the challenge. It's a real different way of playing golf.
Hendry tees off his opening round at 11:20 tonight, with fellow Kiwi Ryan Fox getting underway at 2:30 tomorrow morning. That's the news.
Thai boys speak of their ordeal for the first time.
I still want to follow my dream to become a professional footballer, but also have another dream, maybe a Navy SEAL.
Calls to ban gay conversion therapy.
People should celebrate their love. And what the counsellors told me and what I thought my whole life just doesn't make sense.
And the solution to a bruised avocado.
Believe the colour, use your eye. That lovely purple-brown colour does mean it's ready to eat today.
Smashing news. Philippa Tolley and Guy and Espen, a morning report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon. Boosting Pacifica science success in South Auckland schools. And after 10, Robbie Ellis on his musical mashup career, combining classical composition with comedy songwriting. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland through Taranaki, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Periods of rain with possible thunderstorms in the west, easing to the odd shower from evening. Showers clearing most places tomorrow and fine spells increasing. Whanganui, Manawatu and Horowhenua Kapiti Coast, scattered rain developing this afternoon, easing to isolated showers early tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine, but scattered rain about Gisborne for a time today and early tomorrow. Wellington, Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine, but the odd shower possible for Wellington and the Marlborough Sounds. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, occasional rain or showers becoming heavy tomorrow evening south of Haast. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine with high cloud, but a few spots of rain for Southland and Stewart Island. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. We're just going to begin very quickly with some breaking news. British media is reporting that investigators believe they have identified the suspected perpetrators behind the Novichok attack on a former Russian spy and his daughter. Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were exposed to the nerve agent in the English city of Salisbury in March. All of this is just breaking. We're attempting to talk to a correspondent in the UK and we will have more on it as it comes to hand. Certainly we hope to clarify more details before the end of the programme. But we begin tonight with life as a contractor to an SOE. In the past week, we've looked at courier drivers, owner-operators who buy their vans, pay to have their vans decorated in company colours, pay for the uniforms, pay for scanners and other equipment, then drive for courier companies like Freightways and PBT. PBT spoke to us last Friday, but not since. Freightways won't speak to us at all. What we've learned is the extent to which contract workers don't have the safety net employees have. Last night we were told by the Christchurch Budget Service that they're seeing contract drivers who aren't even earning the minimum wage after costs. We've spoken off the record to courier drivers who say their work is both financially and professionally rewarding. But we've heard from more drivers and more contract workers who tell us they're struggling, that life outside the protections of employment law is tough for an increasingly large number of New Zealanders. The government says they know this and they're working on a response, but an SOE, NZ Post, uses a large number of contract workers. I asked their GM, Network Design and Capability, Mark Taylor, how many?
Across our network, we've probably got in the order of 1,500 business partners that deliver parcels for customers.
1,500, and how many of them would be courier post drivers, for example, with vans?
Probably in the order of 600 to 700 courier partners.
Okay. Can we talk about the setup costs for them, the initial costs? What do they have to provide as so-called business partners?
When a partner joins, there's a list of things they need to provide services. That includes their van, the branding, scanners and uniforms and the likes, and mobile phones and stuff like that.
So the vehicle, in fact, I've got the list in front of me, which we were referred to. So the vehicle is somewhere between 24 and 52,000 according to the list. The scanner you have to buy is somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000. The vehicle painting is somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. The courier post decals are somewhere between 500 and 1,000. You say on the courier information pack for would-be drivers, and I quote, "Your vehicle and your uniform are moving billboards that reflect and promote the professionalism of the company." Shouldn't the company pay for that stuff?
I certainly think that when a partner joins up, making sure that the agreement we put in place with them works for both parties, and part of that is obviously providing the branding and the uniform. New Zealand Post does operate a procurement function, so we make sure that our partners get the very best terms for the items they need.
But they still have to pay to be ambassadors for the company, don't they? They still have to pay for the van, to have courier post painted on the side. They still have to pay for the uniform, which you require to be up to a high standard at all times. And when they've done those things, they become ambassadors for the company, don't they? I mean, that's the language you use.
Oh, look, absolutely. The partners we have are an important part of our model and what we service our customers for. So I think having high quality partners who deliver to high standards is really important.
You use the word partners, and so do your competitors at Freightways, so do your competitors at PBT. It seems to be the word the business uses, the courier business uses. But if I look at the courier information pack, you don't describe them as partners. You say the best people, the key to our success is our team. Courier Post employs the best people. Are they employees?
They're contracted partners. They're not employees.
Right, and so...
they're part of a great team, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see them in this workplace, and that they seem to be really good people who work really hard and really give a damn about getting it right. Let's talk about what they don't get as partners, which they would get as employees. Do they get sick leave?
No, they don't get the same terms and conditions as employees.
Do they get annual leave?
Under the agreement structure we have, there is the ability, well not the ability, there's the provision for our partners to take annual leave, and they then put one of their relief drivers on.
And so when they take annual leave, do they get paid for that?
Their relief will continue to provide services, and we will pay we will still pay the business for the services they provide.
Right, and that's a feature of Courier Post, New Zealand Post, and I quote, "Each contractor is guaranteed a minimum monthly payment. If you don't reach this minimum, we will top up your payment for the month." Is that right?
That is correct.
And that's seen as the strength of your model. What is the minimum monthly payment?
The minimum monthly payment for our partners varies. It's a range because each one of our partners covers different areas and has different activities that they perform. What's really important, though, is that when we're looking at that payment structure, it works for the partner as well as us.
And so what is a typical kind of minimum? Can you give me a ballpark figure, somewhere in the middle there?
I'd prefer not to give a number, John.
And why is that? Because I think that's meaningful in the context of the conversation we're having about what these people are earning after their expenses. I mean, if there is a minimum, and you are sufficiently proud of the minimum to talk about it in your Career Information Pact, wouldn't it be good to tell us what it was?
Well, the issue around providing a number is that, as I said, each agreement has different areas and different activities that get performed. So what we do when we work with the partner to figure out what the payment structure should be is we make sure that all of the costs that would be considered, kilometres travelled, for example, the type of vehicle, as you mentioned, there's a range. There are small vehicles and larger vehicles. So each one of those is factored in, including the hours that would be anticipated to be needed.
So is it an hourly minimum?
No, it's a daily minimum.
Okay, and you can't tell us what that daily minimum is?
It's quite a broad range, John.
Right. Let's talk about the working day, so we have some understanding. In the frequently asked questions part of the Career Information Pack, there is a question: what are the hours I will need to work? Our contractors work generally between 10 and 14 hours a day. Is that right?
It would be in the order of 10 to 12 hours a day.
A full day generally starts at about 5 a.m. when you come to the depot. Is that right?
Oh, look, it varies by area, John. I mean, it does depend on what area the partner's working in. So, there's a couple of things I'd add to this. The first one is that the safety and well-being of our partners is really important to us. And so when we're looking at the area that partner's going to be servicing, we make sure that work can be done within a safe period of time. And one of the first checks for that is making sure that the likes of the work time rule regulations are covered, and that's available on the Land Transport website. But the other part is making sure that we're not asking people to work hours that are just not practical, because the problem you run into there is our service will then be impacted potentially, and that then provides a situation that doesn't work for either of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's safe? What do you regard as safe hours?
That depends on the area, but sort of anything under the work time rule requirement would be considered safe.
Okay, and what is the work time rule requirement? You have me at a disadvantage there. Could you tell me what they regard as safe?
I can't recall fully what the work time rule says, but it's in the order of 10 to 14 hours a day.
Okay, and that's what you, let's go back to this frequently asked questions document. That's what you say. Our contractors work between 10 and 14 hours a day, depending on the specified run, which is what you're saying. Yes. A full day generally starts at about 5 a.m. when you come to the depot and sort out your freight ready for delivery. A day ends roughly from 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m, so that's 12 to 13 hours. When you return to the depot with your final items to be sent to other destinations around the country, you will normally be required to work Saturdays, and some Sundays may be required. So let's set aside the may be required Sundays and say these are people working 6 days a week, somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to 14 hours a day, so a minimum working week of 60 hours.
That wouldn't be typical. I wouldn't expect, John. I mean, we make sure that we're working with our partners all the time, that we've got a working environment and working hours that ensures that your safety and well-being is catered for.
How do you do that? Because there's no reference to that in the Career Information Pack, and the hours you specify for people who are interested in becoming career post drivers are very explicit: 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things in that question, John. The first thing is that all of our branches and depots have fleet teams, and those fleet teams work really closely with all of our partners to make sure that things, working daily to the benefit of everyone. And the second one is that what's on our courier site, or the website that you're quoting, is for information for people who are interested in joining us or the industry. It's not the specified terms and conditions. It's indicative only.
Okay. Although it's interesting what you choose to reflect as indicative, right? And I won't quote it again, but it does seem on the face of it to quite explicitly say you're looking at a minimum of a 60-hour week. But you're saying that it is managed at the depots and safety is a consideration. Can we talk about what you earn per hour after expenses such as petrol, depreciation, cell phone provision, vehicle maintenance, and paying for relief drivers and all that kind of stuff? What are your drivers earning per hour after costs and tax?
I don't have those exact figures to hand, John, but certainly the hourly rate that our business partners will be earning net is a function of obviously what they earn and what their costs are. Our cost models cover the known costs that we have, and you've quoted some of them there, but certainly K's. We've recently adjusted our model to accommodate the Auckland fuel tax, for example, so we make sure that those models stay current. And then the hourly rate that a partner earns, again, will be arranged depending on the area, but it's fair for the work that was asked to be done.
And what do you regard as fair, as an hourly rate? What's fair?
It's got to be market competitive. I think it's got to be market competitive. It's got to work for the business partner, and it's got to be such that it attracts great people to this industry. And in the main, that's what happens. We in the communities we operate in, we have a fantastic team doing cool things for our customers every day.
Yeah, and once again, we see them in this building, and they do seem to be a fantastic team. Let's come back to an issue that we raised yesterday on Checkpoint, and that is that we are being told that after costs and expenses, some drivers for some courier firms are not making the minimum wage. Are you able to assure us that there aren't courier post drivers not making the minimum wage after costs?
What I can say is that we are not aware of any of our business partners earning less than the minimum wage, and in any case, it is really, really important to us that it does work for our business partners all the time, because they are the face of our business. And if any partner has any issue or concern regarding the work they're doing and the payment they're getting for that, they can have a chat to their fleet manager, who will absolutely work with them to look at what can be done.
You use the word partners, and they are contractors and they are not employees. And because they're not employees, they don't get sick leave, they don't get the paid annual leave where they can take their family on holiday, they don't get the same safety nets that employees get. Can we talk about their right as independent contractors to work for other firms? If you've invested in Courier Post and you drive a Courier Post van, are you allowed to deliver for other companies?
We do deliver for other companies. I mean, one of the things about being an important member of the community servicing the likes of the online shopping market is that we do take freight for other companies.
Yeah, you do. I'm asking if the drivers can. Can they work independently for other companies?
The terms and conditions that the partners are under does say that if they're providing courier services, that can be for New Zealand Post only.
So they can only work for you.
If they're providing courier services, they can only work for New Zealand Post. And I think one thing I'd like to add there, though, is that part of the reason for that is to ensure that health and safety requirements are met, because what we work with our guys every day is to make sure that they're not working hours that are unsafe, and if you're doing jobs outside of that, that can become a risk.
Right. So they drive your vans, although they've paid for the vans themselves. They have Courier Post on the side, although they've paid for it to be there themselves. They wear a Courier Post uniform, although they've paid for that themselves. They're not allowed to do deliveries independently for other courier companies. These people are employees, aren't they? They're not independent contractors at all. They are in a 100% master-servant relationship with Courier Post, aren't they?
We have partnership agreements with our partners, John, not employment agreements.
Look, you're using the English language there, and I understand you're giving me words, But I want you to tell me in what way these people aren't in a master-servant relationship with New Zealand Post. They wear your uniform, they drive your van, they can only work for you, they are required to turn up at 5 o'clock in the morning for the most part. They are paid by you. In what way are they not employees?
Every one of our partners gets to choose how they do their job each day. And it's important to us that there's flexibility.
But sorry to interrupt, Mark, and I really appreciate your fronting, and I want to say on the record as we speak that your competitors in the private sector are not fronting. You are an SOE in your fronting. You say they get to choose. No, they don't. It's all or nothing. Their relationship as courier drivers is an all or nothing relationship with Courier Post. They don't get to choose. And that makes them employees, surely, doesn't it?
We have partnership agreements that work for both parties, John.
That was New Zealand Post GM of Network Design and Capability, Mark Baker. We are going to go back to the government on this. New Zealand Post is an SOE. The SOE Minister, Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters, declined to comment, saying the situation is an operational matter. We think it's bigger than that, and we will keep following it up. 26 minutes past 5. 12 boys and their soccer coach rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand have made their first public appearance since their release from hospital. The group gave sometimes harrowing details of their time underground, including their attempts to dig their way out as they waited for 10 days simply to be found. Bridget Burke reports.
Reliving their ordeal in public for the first time since being rescued from a flooded cave in Thailand. The 12 boys from the Wild Boars soccer team, along with their coach, dressed smartly in matching soccer kit, described what it was like being trapped underground for more than 2 weeks.
I was really afraid, not to be able to return home.
The team was found squatting in a flooded chamber several kilometres within the cave complex and described the moment 2 British divers discovered them as magical.
We heard some noises of people talking, so we told each other to be quiet and listen to the noise. We weren't sure, so we listened, and it turns out, yes, it's true. I was surprised.
The boys left the Thai hospital to travel straight to the news conference, which was broadcast live throughout Thailand. Coach Ekapol Chantawong said the team had only planned to go inside the cave for an hour. But once it started to rain, they found themselves trapped and they had to swim to a dry cavern.
We had to get wet.
And can everyone swim?
Yes, we all can swim.
So you decided to spend the night, and did you have any food with you?
The answer is no, we don't have anything with us, and we found the water coming off the rock above where we can actually feed ourselves, and so we found some shelters to stay that night.
It was also revealed the boys had dug tunnels of up to 4 metres in an attempt to find a way out in the days before they were discovered. Fears had been raised about what the media attention could do to their mental health, so the group, aged 11 to 16, and their 25-year-old coach were asked a series of questions journalists had submitted in advance. Since being rescued in a huge international effort earlier last week, the boys have gained an average of 3 kilograms, or 6.6 pounds. One of the doctors who treated them said the group was in good health considering their ordeal.
We've discovered that their mental state is quite good. They should be able to handle social stress that they may face once they return home. And they are also physically strong enough to return to a normal life now.
During the news conference, 2 of the boys held up a framed pencil sketch of Saman Kunan, the 38-year-old former Thai Navy diver who died while he worked underwater, laying oxygen tanks along a potential exit route. 11-year-old Chanin Vibun Runruang, the youngest of the group, was asked to read out his message written alongside the picture.
I would like to express our condolences, and please help you rest in peace. And thank you very much for your sacrifice. May he rest in peace.
The boys are expected to be ordained as Buddhist monks to honour Saman Kunan. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up, reports from the UK that investigators believe they have identified the suspected perpetrators behind the Novichok attack on a former Russian spy and his daughter. We're hoping to cross live to the UK very shortly. Donald Trump publicly points the finger at Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Dunedin's ambitious plan for its waterfront receives an $800,000 shot in the arm from the government. We'd love your feedback, particularly on this issue of independent contractors working for one company effectively but not being employees. Do text us 2101, and if you are one, we'd love to hear from you. Lots coming up, so let's get straight to the headlines with Katrina.
British investigators say they believe they've identified the suspected perpetrators behind the Novichok attack on the Skripals in Salisbury. Several Russians are believed to have been involved in the poisoning. Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were struck down with the Novichok poison in March, but they've since recovered. Meanwhile, police have recovered a small bottle containing the nerve agent that killed a woman and left her partner severely ill in Wiltshire. A group supporting children abused in state care in Australia says it's not fair that a New Zealander who's been deported is now unable to get compensation. The man, who RNZ is only identifying as John, was sexually abused after he was put into an Australian state care facility at 11. Care Leavers Australasia say many people who've suffered abuse have been denied payments by the Australian government, but anyone who was sexually abused in an institution deserves compensation. A Christchurch couple have admitted stealing $500,000 from a government-funded trust for disabled people to finance a lavish lifestyle. Cecilia and Alphonsus Ellenbrook took money allocated from community daycare and vocational services for people with intellectual disabilities and spent it on extensive international travel, cigarettes, alcohol and jewellery. The Regional Economic Development Minister says the South Island has got less money from his $3 billion fund because councils have been slower in coming forward with ideas. Shane Jones says the $800,000 announced for Dunedin's waterfront is just the start of the government's plans for the mainland. A woman with dementia has gone missing in the Wellington suburb of Kilburnie. The police say 79-year-old Marion Twitchett was last seen about 2:30 today in the Kilburnie Crescent and Henry Street area. The police say Mrs. Twitchett suffers dementia and may have become confused and lost. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's 28 minutes away. Nona's standing by, but we're just waiting. We're expecting a foreign correspondent, a correspondent from the UK, to call in about the next 30 seconds. Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, of course, were exposed to the nerve agent Novichok in Salisbury in March. It does look like now British investigators believe they know who is responsible. While we stand by on that, we're getting a lot of feedback on the position of so-called independent contractors who work for just one employer or client. People are saying, what about freelancers? Freelancers do tend to move around, but yes, that is an interesting case, particularly if you stay with someone for a very, very long time. The interesting thing about this case, and the reason that we've looked at couriers to such a great extent, is that they buy the vans. They have the vans painted. They buy the uniforms. They buy the scanner. They wear the depreciation. In other words, they assume all the costs of a small business, but they behave in a master-servant relationship exactly as if they were employees, right down to turning up for certain hours and not being able to work for anyone else. So it's restrictive on the one hand. Anyway, so that's why we're looking at it. NZ Post did front. They are an SOE and we really appreciate them fronting. Freightways, PBT, and none of the private courier companies have fronted. PBT did front on Friday, but we haven't heard from them since. Lots of people saying they think that IRD would say such a singular relationship makes them employers, not independent contractors. We'll go to IRD, but before all of it, let's go to England. British media is reporting that investigators believe they've identified the suspected perpetrators behind the Novichok attack on a former Russian spy and his daughter. Sergei Skripal and Yulia were exposed to the nerve agent in Salisbury in March. We're joined now by UK correspondent Adam Gilchrist. Adam, it's great to have you back on Checkpoint. Thank you so much for being available at 6:30 in the morning. What on earth is happening?
You're very welcome. Good morning. Yeah, it's only an hour ago that basically this story came out. So obviously things need to work their way through and details need to be checked. But at this stage, what we know is that investigators have looked at the CCTV and cross-checked with records of people who entered the UK, so they've gone through all the border control stuff. I always wonder what happens to you when you put your passport in the machine or flash it. Well, it can indeed be checked afterwards, and it's taken some time, let's be honest, since March, and of course we also had the second poisoning, but they reckon they've identified several perpetrators. They haven't put a number on that yet, and that they believe they are Russian. Again, the finger points east from our point of view. I have to say this is also very timely because the inquest into the death of Dawn Sturgis, she's the woman who died earlier this month after contamination from Novichok, that inquest opens today.
So so they've used, I guess, facial recognition technology, and it must be just a laborious process, a needle in a haystack, although I guess it's comparing all the needles in the haystack, right, to find out which needles match. But they are saying explicitly they believe they'd come from Russia. They are saying that explicitly?
At this stage, it has come from, it is believed that.
Right.
I mean, in other words, there are sources from the Metropolitan Police who've been asked questions, and they're not being drawn too much on exactly those details. But essentially, for the police to say they think they know who did it, think of any other crime case, they don't generally say that unless they are pretty damn sure they know who did it. So if they're pointing the finger, looking at passports, looking at face recognition, looking at basically photos as well, and comparing them and thinking, yeah, they were in Salisbury at the right time to have left this substance. Also bear in mind that only a few days ago they identified that they think they found the Novichok substance in a perfume bottle of some sort that led to the second contamination.
Wow.
So they're looking at all of that. I have to say, John, they've had 100 detectives working on this, and on this case alone, and pretty much for the past, 4 months now. So I guess progress was necessary, and it looks like they've made it.
Adam Gilchrist joining us live from the UK at very short notice. We so appreciate it, Adam. Thank you, and lovely to talk to you as always. Isn't that fascinating? So it does look like investigators believe they have their man or their women or both, and they do, it seems, think they have come from Russia. We will update you if we hear any more, but let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier, who's been sitting very patiently beside me.
Not quietly.
Patiently and quietly. Thanks, Nona. Regional centres are set to drive New Zealand's economic growth over the next 18 months.
Yes.
Why? Where's it coming from? What's going on?
Well, it's actually improving dairy prices. Now, we did have a bit of a dip since the early part of the year, but certainly the prices are a lot better than they were the year before last. In 2016, we saw some pretty low prices improving through last year. And even though they're a little bit weaker this year, still a lot better than where we were. That has underpinned the confidence in the regions. And we've seen that other commodities are also improving. So good news for the rural sector, the provincial centres, not so much for the major centre, and that's one of the things that Infometrics has found in their forecast looking out over the next 18 months. And I spoke with Gareth Kiernan from Infometrics. He had something to say about economic growth depending on export conditions continuing, and we know there's a lot of risk there, so this is what he had to say.
Should the sort of tit-for-tat trade war stuff continue to escalate, then that does pose downside risks for New Zealand.
So if the status quo is maintained, then we could expect to have economic growth above 2% between now and 2021?
Yeah, that's right. And so it's not a bad growth performance, but it is a bit of a slowdown from the growth we've had over the last few years. And when you look at the urban areas, I guess it's a case of slowing population growth, the construction activity pushing close to its peak now. You've still got capacity pressures in the labour market as well, which are limiting growth. And then you overlay that with the drop in business confidence and consumer confidence that we've seen over recent months. And it does just suggest, particularly in the urban areas, a bit more caution in terms of business investment and hiring decisions, and also households potentially just a bit more cautious in their spending decisions as well.
And so that's the chief forecaster at Infometrics, Gareth Kiernan. Now, he's obviously, you know, like, it's a little different from a survey, though, at least, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a forecast instead this time.
Excellent. We do spend a lot of time doing crystal ball and tea leaf reading.
Yes, it's true, we do.
Yeah. Although that sounded reasonably rigorous from Gareth Kiernan. Yeah. Thanks, Nona. Another large hotel is going to be built in Auckland.
Yes, so that's good because we have been short on hotels. So another one's in the works is a new 200-room hotel, a luxury hotel. It's going to go up across from where the new International Convention Centre is being built in downtown Auckland. So on one street you've got the Sky City Casino and Sky Tower. Across the street from there on Hobson, we've got the new International Convention Center and another large hotel which is being developed by Sky City. And across the street from that on Nelson Street will be this other very large hotel, another 200 rooms there, 4.5-star hotel. And they're going to spend, what, $65 million on it. It's not small. It's not a small amount.
Sorry, who's going to build this? Do we know?
This is a company called Sedima Hotels and Resorts.
Oh, right, so it's not a Sky? It's not
no,
because Sky owns a lot of real estate in that area.
They sure do, but not that street.
Right.
Well, who knows?
Yeah,
I'm saying that. I didn't check, so I shouldn't say that. I think they're going the other way. As a matter of fact, they did buy another corner at the corner of Albert and Victoria not so long ago.
That's 600 metres away from us, if that, 400 or 500 metres away from where we were sitting here.
Yeah.
Up the wind tunnel that is Hobson Street.
Yeah, so there's a lot of development, that's for sure. And this is a good thing. So if this goes ahead, and it's a big if here, and the reason I say that is not because they're not committed to building it, but where are they going to find the people to build it? And that is a different story. We still don't have enough, the kind of builders that finish hotels. We had the Hyatt down near the in the viaduct, where they brought in a whole lot of tradespeople from China to finish it because it's a 5-star hotel, and the finishings have to be above the grade, and they can't. And of course, Fletcher Building's out of the mix now. They're not building hotels anymore. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge. We'll see where they get the staff to build that. But if we get it, we'll have 1,100 extra beds by 2025, which is meeting our current needs. Of course, the number of tourists coming to New Zealand continues to grow, so we're still going to need more hotels.
Thanks, Nona. What happened on the markets today?
Yeah, well, the NZX Top 50 Index, it fell about 1/3%, 29 points to 8,918, and that's still with the jitters over trade. And the New Zealand dollar is trading at 67.8 US cents, just about where it was yesterday, 91.4 Australian and 51.9 pence.
Nona Peltier, thank you so much. For the first time, the US President Donald Trump has publicly pointed the finger at Vladimir Putin over Russia's meddling in the 2016 US presidential election. The White House is struggling to contain a political outcry and confusion over President Trump's summit with President Putin in Helsinki this week, in which he failed to confront the Russian leader over electoral interference and cast doubt instead on American intelligence agencies. He then went into an extraordinary piece of damage control, saying he'd misspoken and should have used the word would instead of wouldn't, or the other way around, in a key sentence about Russian meddling. So what do Americans think of Mr. Trump's performance in Helsinki, his comments since, and the political firestorm in its wake? CNN's Kyung La went to the swing state of Wisconsin to find out.
This is the Dan O'Donnell Show.
So has Trump been arrested for treason yet? Has he returned to the United States in the brig of Air Force One? Welcome to the show.
The swing state of Wisconsin, the conservative base circling the wagons around Trump.
The reactions from the left yesterday were ridiculous.
But amid the outraged callers, one moved by the president's press conference with Putin.
The man is an embarrassment to me. I voted for him. I will not again.
Really?
Really.
Swing voters are notoriously difficult to predict. So there might be an issue like this that is all anyone talks about for the better part of a week. I don't believe that there is going to be any lasting impact.
Wisconsin swing voters, many of them white working-class voters, swung to Trump in 2016 in Kenosha County, just south of Milwaukee. Trump won here by just 255 votes, a county that hadn't voted for a Republican president since Richard Nixon. Like other parts of Wisconsin, Kenosha County has seen jobs leave. The Chrysler plant. Spanky's Bar is a couple of blocks from that torn-down plant. Since Trump took office, the economy has only gotten better in Kenosha, says Anna Stewart. She voted for Trump in 2016.
Do you think that Trump will be reelected by this county?
I do. I do. I think he's got the steam going. He's done a great job so far. As president, he's shown us that he continues to persevere beyond the criticism and do what's right anyways.
You're going to vote for him again?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Tony Valente's conversations over the bar rarely focus on Russia. Do people here care?
I don't know. The economy's good. Money seems to be flowing pretty well.
house prices are coming up, interest rates are going up. I think people are pretty happy with that.
But the press conference with Putin did have an effect on Pam Anderson.
For him to kind of just push it off to the side and say like he doesn't believe it, I think he's really mocking the whole system.
A swing voter now pushed away from Trump.
I had voted for Obama, and this time around I went ahead and voted for Donald Trump, and I really regret that decision.
Pam Anderson says this about Trump's backpedaling, the would versus wouldn't. She says, quote, "That's total BS." She says her opinion about the president has not changed one bit.
That report from Kenosha, Wisconsin, from CNN. Let's go from Kenosha to Dunedin, where the ambitious waterfront plan has received a shot in the arm from the government. Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones announced to delighted city officials that the project's feasibility study and business case will get more than $800,000 from the Provincial Growth Fund. Our Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown was there.
Before Damien Van Brandenburg's cockle shell and seaside-inspired plan for Dunedin's harbourside even got off the ground, critics derided it as a pipe dream. But he found strong support for his vision from local government, business and iwi, and today's central government threw its hat in the ring.
You can't deny that in its full form this is going to be iconic and transformational. And I think it's an absolutely legitimate role for me as a regional development minister to thoroughly support that, because it has the mandate, as far as I'm concerned, amongst economic stakeholders and civic leaders in Dunedin.
That's Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones's assessment of Mr Van Brandenburg's vision for Steamer Basin. Mr Jones has called on the Dunedin City Council, which is leading the group of organisations and individuals known as the Dunedin Waterfront Partners, to get on with this early work so the vision can begin to take shape. He says the city is in line for more money from the Provincial Growth Fund as the development progresses, and there are already other projects in the works.
Something like this does not happen unless a whole government commits to it, because you're talking about years and years of mahi, of not only engineering work but skilled work. And there are other proposals in and around Dunedin that I know are on the way, and they do pertain to an engineering hub, and I've already said that if I have the chance I'm definitely going to breathe life back into Hillside.
The Dunedin City Council has already committed to building Mr Van Brandenburg's stylistic bridge linking the city centre to the waterfront at a cost of $20 million. Dunedin Mayor Dave Cowell says today's decision vindicates the council's enthusiasm for the project.
This is the next step where we actually have government vindication of this, government support for this, and that makes it so much stronger. So now we can go on to the next stage.
Mr Cowell says he hopes to see the cockle shell-inspired cultural centre rising from the harbourside in 5 or 6 years' time. Associate Finance Minister David Parker, who hails from Dunedin, says the aspirations have been unifying for the city.
Already you can feel the confidence of Dunedin lifting. People have a sense of prospectivity, that there's a positive future for Dunedin.
And the man behind the vision, architect Damien Van Brandenburg, agrees.
I think it's a fantastic step forward. I'm so thrilled to see everyone come together here, and I think even the way it was signed here demonstrated how the City Council, the Regional Council, Ngāi Tahu, the Port, everyone has come together, the university as well, united to head forward into a positive space.
Shane Jones says the commitment to Dunedin's waterfront development and others that are in the pipeline show the government is not snubbing the South Island in the way it distributes the Provincial Growth Fund.
Naturally, I've had a boot in the bum for apparently spending too much time in Love Up North, but I've been in Invercargill, and I said it somewhat in a jocular fashion, but the people of the South are quite conservative, I find. So, be a little bit more like us warm-blooded Dalmatian Maoris in Kaitaia and come to the party sooner rather than later.
The council plans to present its business case to the government before the end of the year. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
What a beautiful looking day it was in Dunedin. Thanks, Timothy. A support organisation says the Australian government has a duty of care to victims who are abused as children while in state care and should compensate them regardless of their citizenship. Now, Care Leavers Australasia Network's comments come after RNZ revealed that a New Zealander was abused in state care but unable to get up to $150,000 in compensation after being deported. Our reporter, Edward Gay, filed this.
The man, who RNZ is only identifying as John, was 11 when he was put into an Australian state care facility and was legally made a ward of the state 2 years later. John says one warder stands out in his memory. Initially, the warder was kind, handing out cigarettes and coffee to the boys.
It used to be the cigarettes and the coffee and treating you how you want to be treated, feeling respected and liked, and they made you feel like that. And then the next minute, they're threatening you, or they're doing things to you.
The sexual abuse happened in the laundry room in the basement.
There were times where I know that the tea or coffee, whatever he was bringing around, was drugged, because there'd be times we'd go to sleep and just bang, wake up groggy and just not remembering anything, and then hearing from one of the other boys what had happened, to them. It was nasty,
Later in life, John turned to drugs and was arrested for cooking methamphetamine. He was jailed for 3 years in Australia before being sent to an immigration detention centre for a further 16 months. And he says he isn't the only New Zealander to miss out on compensation.
Between all of us, there was probably 5 Kiwi boys there, same story. And we used to say, well, at least we're all going to have that, it's going to give us something to get on with life. And every one of them were deported, every one of them.
Leonie Sheedy is the chief executive of Care Leavers Australasia Network, who, amongst other things, support and advocate for people who grew up in orphanages, children's homes and foster care. She says the institution that John was held in as a child is notorious.
Many people have come forward from that place and told horrific abuse stories to the Royal Commission.
Ms Sheedy says many people have been excluded from the compensation after leaving the country.
Some of them because they've chosen to leave Australia, some of them because they've been adopted by people who moved them overseas, and some of them have been deported to countries.
But Ms Sheedy says the Australian government can't wash its hands of people just because they now live elsewhere.
They paid public servants to work in those orphanages. They paid money to the churches and charities to keep those establishments still operating, and they certainly have a duty of care to all children, regardless of where they currently reside as adults.
Her group advocates for everyone who is in a care facility, regardless of where they live, and it's lobbying the government on this issue. She encourages other people to get in touch. The phrase fair go is part of the Aussie vernacular. It's a widely used term that asks for fair treatment. So is John getting a fair go?
Welcome to the National Redress Scheme. If you are calling about eligibility for the National Redress Scheme or have a general inquiry, please press 1. If you are calling about
the redress scheme is managed by the Australian Department of Social Services. A media spokesperson says they don't do interviews, but asked RNZ to submit questions by email. The spokesperson says in a statement that the compensation scheme was developed with input from officials and survivor advocacy groups. The legislation says a person must be an Australian citizen or permanent resident when applying for compensation. The department, however, did not answer questions about how the state can shirk responsibility when a child is sexually abused in state care, regardless of their nationality. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gaiaho.
Exactly 7 minutes to 6. The cost of a large dam proposed for the Tasman district has swelled by nearly a third, meaning it's effectively dead in the water. New costings put the price tag for the Waimea Community Dam in the Lee Valley near Nelson at over $100 million, $26 million more than estimated. Mayor Richard Kempthorne says it's now unlikely to go ahead, a move that supporters say will slow urban growth and curb primary production. Our Nelson reporter, Tracy Neal, was at today's announcement, and Tracy filed this report.
The prospect of 15 years' work down the drain was written on the faces of those gathered at the Tasman District Council this morning. Mayor Richard Kempthorne says the ongoing success of the Nelson Tasman region is now at stake.
The issue is a critical one for every single person in Richmond, Brightwater, Mapua and Waimea areas, for business and industry, for infrastructure such as our port and for the wider Tasman and Nelson communities.
The project is being driven by the council plus a company, Waimea Irrigators, and Crown Investments. But time is now ticking on a $40 million Crown fund, which will only be handed over if there's a firm plan locked in by early December. Waimea Irrigators strategic advisor John Palmer says they've been completely blindsided.
There has been no indication during the work of the project office until the prices were released that a number of this order should be expected. And so that is disappointing, frustrating and certainly a shock to everybody.
Mr Palmer says the cost increase is mainly due to ballooning construction costs. One of a growing number of opponents, former investment banker Tony Lawton, says most aren't against the dam itself, but question whether the council has done its sums properly.
TEC's initial staff estimates were totally under scope. That was strongly pointed out to them, and so they continued on the project. You know, what's happened and really annoyed ratepayers is they've spent $10 million of ratepayers' funds to getting to this stage.
Figures released by the council last year show just over half of the district's 24,000 ratepayers will pay up to $29 a year for the dam. The remainder could expect annual rates increases of between $29 and $160, depending on where they live and if they are connected to a council water supply. It now raises questions about how Tasman might fulfil its legal responsibility to provide urban water. The council's new chief executive, Janine Dowding, says it's a major setback.
There's quite significant implications for how we manage water, and we are having to face some of the possibilities that will arise from a no-dam scenario. We're talking about those.
Tony Lawton says the council perhaps needs to think more laterally.
What's happening on the whole water provision, urban water supply across New Zealand is that local government are looking at switching that perhaps out of the political vote debate and putting it into separate publicly owned entities.
Mr Lawton says Tasman could even look to its neighbour, Nelson City, which recently agreed to give $5 million to the project and has a well-established water supply through the Maitai Dam. John Palmer from Waimea Irrigators says whatever happens now, the problem isn't going away.
There may well be people rejoicing and saying, well, this is a victory. This is not a victory for anyone. This is just an issue of saying the challenge is greater, but the problem does not go away.
The Mayor says the Tasman District Council will now be looking at exploring how it could secure the extra money, including whether it could tap into the government's $1 billion Regional Development Fund. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
3 minutes to 6. We're just going to have a bit of escapism, really. It's been dubbed a sports car for the skies. Luxury British car maker Aston Martin has unveiled a concept 3-seater aircraft at the Farnborough Air Show and hopes to have a flying version ready for the next show in 2 years' time. This report from Reuters.
James Bond would certainly approve. This is Aston Martin's vision for a luxury personal aircraft. The Volante Vision concept design has vertical takeoff and landing capabilities and would hit speeds of around 200 miles per hour. Unveiled at the Farnborough Air Show, Aston Martin is joining the likes of Airbus and Uber in a bid to revolutionise the way people travel.
The same way that you have Uber and you have an Aston Martin, you'll have Uber in the skies and you'll have Aston Martin in the skies. So there will be a luxury element to the low-altitude aerospace market, and we see that as very organic for Aston Martin to look into entering that.
They've now partnered with Rolls-Royce to develop the propulsion system for the 3-seater craft.
It feels like a fighter jet, but at the same time it has the Aston Martin luxury. We are using a combination of advanced motors, generators, power electronics and batteries all coupled together to make that Rolls-Royce propulsion system.
Cranfield University scientists are on board to integrate AI-powered autonomous capabilities.
So the concept is to take it through being semi-autonomous and then to being fully autonomous in due course. Obviously you've got to detect what's going on in that external environment and then turn that around incredibly quickly in the computer system with the artificial intelligence built in to actually achieve the necessary level of autonomy.
As with Aston Martin's famous sports cars, Volante's clientele will need deep pockets.
Look, this is clearly a luxury object. It's a sports car for the skies, so pricing is going to be commensurate with that. So it's certainly into the 7 figures.
If the Volante concept does take off, it'll be years before it becomes a reality. Enough time, perhaps, for James Bond to save up the deposit.
That report from Reuters, so much feedback coming in on the issue of career drivers and independent contractors across the board. Thank you. We're going to return to it after 6 because we've kind of been learning since we first covered the story last Friday. So we're going to take stock of what we've learnt so far in terms of your feedback. I think Christopher sums up what a lot of you are saying. If a person works for a company, drives a company logo van and wears the company livery, they are an employee. Lots of you saying that kind of thing. We will bring you more feedback after our stock take, which is after the news, which is next with Katrina. Well, it's not quite next because, of course, it's preceded by the pips.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Reports in Britain say investigators have identified the suspects behind the nerve agent attack on the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury in March. The pair were poisoned with Novichok in an attack Britain has blamed on Russia. Investigators are reported to have identified those responsible through CCTV footage and have cross-checked it with records of people who entered the country around that time. They suspect several Russians were involved. The news comes as an inquest is due to open this week for Dawn Sturgis, who died earlier this month. She and her partner, Charlie Rowley, came into contact with Novichok after they picked up a perfume bottle in the same general area as the first attack. The pressure will be on for a business case for the Dunedin waterfront to be finished by Christmas. The government has announced it will contribute $800,000 to $20,000 to the development. The Dunedin Mayor, Dave Cull, says the announcement vindicates the Dunedin City Council's vision for the waterfront. He says the funding will be used for a feasibility assessment of the multi-million-dollar proposal.
This funding is for developing the business case. So we'll be getting onto that, and as the Minister said, he wants pace, and we will be putting all our efforts into it so that we have a business case this year to take to government for the next stage of funding, which will be obviously considerably more.
Mr Cull says he hopes the development, with its cockleshell-inspired cultural centre, will be finished in 5 to 6 years' time. An organisation that supports victims of child sex abuse and state care says the Australian government should pay compensation to victims regardless of where they live. A New Zealander who was abused in Australian state care is unable to access up to $150,000 in compensation after being deported. Edward Gay reports.
The man, who RNZ is only identifying as John, was put into an Australian state care facility at 11 and was legally made a ward of the state 2 years later. It was while in state care that John was sexually abused. Later in life, John was jailed for drug offences and then sent to a detention centre for 16 months before being deported. Care Leavers Australasia says many have been excluded from compensation, but it says if they were sexually abused in an institution, then they deserve compensation. I Tamaki Makoto, ko Edward Gaiaho.
The Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has called on the Pope to sack Adelaide's Archbishop. Philip Wilson is the most senior Catholic in the world to be convicted of concealing child sex abuse. He was sentenced to 12 months detention, but has said he'll lodge an appeal against his conviction. The Archbishop has refused to quit his post, and Mr Turnbull has previously said Wilson should resign. Today, the Prime Minister intensified the pressure on the Catholic Church by saying it's clear he should resign. He said the time has come for the Pope to sack him. The Police Association says there are a lot of lessons to be learnt from a siege near Kawerau where 4 officers were shot. The Independent Police Conduct Authority has criticised police for how they handled a search of Rhys Warren's Bay of Plenty home in 2016. 3 officers were shot by Warren as they entered his home, and a 4th was shot by Warren later. The Police Association President, Chris Cahill, says the IPCA can look at things in hindsight when things have settled down, but officers have to make decisions in fast-moving and volatile situations. Mr Cahill says while officers were hurt, nobody was killed and the lessons learned have been put into practice already. Supporters of a large dam proposed for the Tasman district say urban growth will slow and millions of dollars will be lost annually in primary production now that the project is close to collapse. But opponents say new cost estimates announced today reflect what they've been saying all along. Tracy Neal reports.
Mayor Richard Kempthorne says unless they can find an urgent lifeline, the Waimea Community Dam is dead. New figures show it will now cost over $100 million, which is $26 million more than estimated in 2015. Mr Kempthorne says without the dam, Tasman and Nelson's spot on the Regional Growth League table will drop. An opponent, former investment banker Tony Lawton, says water provision models are changing. He says it's possible they'll be taken away from politicians and handed to separate publicly owned entities. In Nelson, Tracy Neal.
It's 6:04. Sport and the Crusaders hooker Cody Taylor says it's a nice luxury to replace one All Blacks prop with another for Saturday's Super Rugby quarter-final against the Sharks in Christchurch. All Blacks duo Taylor and Owen Franks are both returning for the defending champions, but loosehead prop Joe Moody has not recovered fully from injury. But Taylor says the depth of the Crusaders, who are also bolstered by the return of All Blacks lock Scott Barrett, means they don't lose much with Moody absent.
Yeah, we've got Tim Perry steps in. He's another All Black prop, which is pretty unheard of in terms of squads. So to be able to chuck in another All Black in the mix to be starting is pretty special.
Cody Taylor. The publicity blitz around Usain Bolt's potential trial at Australian football club, the Central Coast Mariners, could cost the team the opportunity to sign the Jamaican sprint star. The news has alerted clubs around the world to the likely riches on offer by signing Bolt. And the New Zealand golfer Ryan Fox says this year's British Open will offer up a few surprises to the players. Known as one of the game's longest hitters, Fox says that could almost hinder him at Carnoustie this week.
The ball's going miles, hitting 300 yard plus 2 irons off tees, so that'll be a new challenge in itself. It'll be fun. Might make a couple of the tee shots quite interesting, trying to miss these nasty pot bunkers they have here, but that's the challenge of links golf. That's what I really enjoy, trying to have some imagination, trying to control your ball. It's good fun.
Ryan Fox starts his opening round at 2:30 tomorrow morning with fellow Kiwi Michael Hendry away at 11:20 tonight. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance looks forward to a future powered by sawdust. We have a window on the world of axolotls. They're all over the place, except in the wild, where they're nearly extinct. And Peggy Revell offers some insights into Canada's new right-wing activists. And after 10, Karen Hayes back on lately with a cocktail of lively guests.
My mother was having muesli in the mornings with yoghurt and with coconut essence in the yoghurt. And I said to my mum, "How's that going, the breakfast of yours?" She goes, "Oh, it's great, but I ran out of coconut essence, so I've been using Malibu."
The Happy Hour with Karen Hay. It's part of Nights on RNZ National.
That's a very funny cut. Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland through Taranaki, including Coromandel Bay of plenty in the central high country. Periods of rain with possible thunderstorms in the west, easing to the odd shower from evening. Showers clearing most places tomorrow and fine spells increasing. Whanganui, Manawatu and Horowhenua Kapiti coast, scattered rain developing this afternoon, easing to isolated showers early tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine but scattered rain about Gisborne for a time today and early tomorrow. Wellington, Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine but the odd shower possible for Wellington and the Marlborough Sounds. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, occasional rain or showers becoming heavy tomorrow evening south of Haast. Canterbury, Otago and Southland mainly fine with high cloud, but a few spots of rain for Southland and Stewart Island, and the Chatham Islands cloudy periods with the odd shower. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
I was just about to wish you a great weekend. It's only Thursday, isn't it?
No, one whole day to go,
Okay.
John.
Okay.
A little bit ahead of yourself there.
Excellent. Thanks, KB. Have a lovely Thursday evening.
I will, thank
See you tomorrow. Earlier in the program, we spoke to NZ Post about their contract drivers, couriers, who buy the vans, paint them in NZ Post colours, buy the uniform, buy the scanner and go out to work delivering for New Zealand Post. That interview is now online, by the way, and good on New Zealand Post for funding because the private courier companies won't. But these people aren't employees, they're contractors, business partners, NZ Post calls them, but they can't drive for other companies. In other words, they're contractually committed to being faithful, but don't get the protections even the lowest paid employees employees enjoy. Now, we've concentrated on owner-operator courier drivers over the past week, but this by no means is restricted to the courier business. An increasing number of New Zealanders are contract workers with the very, very limited protection that comes with being in that situation. This is some of what we've learnt so far.
I was getting about $210 a day.
That's Jim, once a courier driver for PBT. That $210 he was talking about was before costs.
It used to cost me, I think, $100 a day to run my business, and whatever I made on top of that was mine.
Over the past week, we've been looking at the maths. In Jim's case, as you heard, it was $210 coming in, roughly $100 going out. But for that to have real meaning, you have to know Jim's working day.
I used to start at 6 in the morning, and I would finish not before 5:30 at night, more likely closer to 6 at night.
After costs, that's less than the minimum wage. Some drivers do better, a few do much better, although Peter Gallagher from an organisation called ProDrive doesn't think it's terribly many these days.
And across the industry, John, I doubt that a single company could put forward its books on an examined basis and find that there was a living wage being paid to any single courier contractor in this country.
Contract drivers aren't unionised. On Checkpoint on Monday night, Jared Abbott from the First Union explained why.
If you're a contractor in New Zealand, you're lawfully not allowed to collectively bargain wages because it's seen as some form of price fixing. So we do offer advocacy service for owner drivers called ProDrive, where we help people through commercial law and stuff like that. Unfortunately, they're not covered under employment law where the rights to collectively bargain are contained.
Which means while the driver who knocks at your door at 7 a.m. may be wearing the uniform of the courier company, the chances are they'll be contracting to them as an owner-operator in their own van with very few of the ordinary protections employees have. But they're self-employed, right? One-person businesses, effectively. They have the van, they can do what they like. Well, I asked Mark Baker of NZ Post, could they use their own van to make deliveries for another courier company?
The terms and conditions that the partners are under does say that if they're providing courier services, that can be for New Zealand Post only.
In other words, contract workers effectively have a formal obligation of fidelity, but not the protections that go with being an employee. We raised this with the Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway.
Essentially, we draw a very stark distinction between employees and contractors, and whereas employees are covered by the Employment Relations Act, they're covered by things like good faith, collective bargaining. People who are contracting aren't covered by any of those things, and I think there is a shared view these days that that's not ideal, and that we really need to find a new set of protocols that apply to these dependent contractors.
Now, the law allows for this. Contractors are not employees, full stop. But as we've looked more and more into what contractors are, we've discovered an increasing number of them struggling to get by. David Mara from the Christchurch Budget Service.
Most of our clients fit somewhere in that spectrum. We do see some people who have standard employment contracts and regular incomes, but they're a minority.
It's not necessarily that their income is low, it's that their costs are often such a significant percentage of that income. So they have the cost of the van, the depreciation on the van once they've bought it, the cost of painting the van, the cost of their uniform, the cost of their scanner, and at the end of all of that, what you are seeing sometimes is an hourly rate that is less than the minimum wage.
I would say that every contractor we have seen, the hourly rate is less than the minimum wage.
We put that to the Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway. These people are potentially not even working at the minimum wage.
That's right. And I think that's really untenable these days.
The Minister says it's untenable, while NZ Post and SOE has hundreds of contract drivers, although NZ Post told us they are confident none are earning less than the minimum wage. They say they're protected by minimum payments, although Mark Baker wouldn't tell us how much those minimum payments are.
The minimum monthly payment for our partners varies. It's a range because each one of our partners covers different areas and has different activities that they perform. What's really important, though, is that when we're looking at that payment structure, it works for the partner as well as us.
And so what is a typical kind of minimum? Can you give me a ballpark figure, somewhere in the middle there?
I'd prefer not to give a number, John.
Outside employment law, because they're not employees, contract drivers almost exist as small businesses with just one client. Now, NZ Post and SOE fronted, but the largest private companies simply wouldn't talk to us. Clearly, some owner-operators are doing nicely, but how many aren't? How badly are they doing? And what is their safety net? Peter Gallagher says we don't know that because the companies don't want us to.
And across the industry, John, I doubt that a single company could put forward its books on an examined basis and find that there was a living wage being paid to any single courier contractor in this country.
That's after costs.
That's after costs.
Because the courier driver, he or she has to provide their own van.
Correct.
They have to pay the petrol.
Correct.
And they are working at a rate, a delivery rate, determined by the parent, the courier company.
100%.
And the courier company determines that rate as low as they possibly can to get the business.
Correct.
So this is an economic model which is really tough on the drivers.
This is an economic model, John, that would not take too many peeling back of the layers of the onion to see that it was actually a form of designed exploitation.
Now, we need to stress this is allowed for. If they are not employees, they are not covered by the same protection in contract law. And that's what we're going to continue to talk to the government about. The government says they are not happy about the situation. What are they going to do about it? That's where we're going next. But with the time at 6:15, let's go back to Thailand, where the rescued cave boys have woken up in their homes for the first time in more than 3 weeks. Many rose at dawn to take part in a religious ceremony. The 12 boys, aged 11 to 16, and their 25-year-old coach were discharged from a hospital in the northern province of Chiang Rai last night and made their first public appearance since their dramatic rescue from the flooded Tan Luang cave. Many of the boys hail from the sleepy district of Mae Sai near the border with Myanmar. The BBC's Jonathan Head has covered the story from the beginning and was with one of the boys' families as they waited for his homecoming.
Dom spent his 13th birthday in the cave, at the time unsure if he'd ever get out. But you'd hardly know it as he thanked the doctors and nurses on leaving hospital today, the very picture of health. He and his teammates made their first public appearance since their astonishing rescue, treating journalists to some nifty footwork before taking the stage to recount their experiences in the cave. They'd gone to explore, just for an hour, they said, but found themselves cut off by fast-rising water. 14-year-old Adun, who speaks the best English among them, then described the moment when, after 9 days, they heard the 2 British divers close by.
We were digging and we heard somebody talking, but we didn't think that it was real, so we stopped and listened. But as it turned out, it happened. It was real. I was shocked. I thought there were Thai officers, but when they got out of the water, I found that they were English. I didn't know what to say to them, so I just say hello. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. I was shocked.
For all of them, the hardest thing in the cave was the hunger. The youngest, Titan, who's 11 years old.
I try not to think about food, but because thinking about food, I try not to think about fried rice.
They finished with a tribute to Saman Gunan, the Thai diver who died while trying to save them. Watching at home was Dom's family. His stepfather, Banpot, hadn't been able to see him in hospital. With just a few hours before he came home, it was hard keeping his emotions back. I'm just waiting to welcome him as soon as he gets here, he said. We'll all be there. I just want to hug him.
Well, it's been a very long wait this evening for Dom's family, but we think just a few more minutes to go before he comes home, and for this very ordinary family, hopefully an end to a very extraordinary story.
And then he was there, the boy who'd missed his 13th birthday, but with his miraculous escape had been given a second chance. It's not often you get an ending as happy as this.
Ain't that the truth? Jonathan Head, the reporter there. Jonathan is with the BBC, of course. One person has been taken to hospital as firefighters continue to battle a scrap metal yard fire in Lower Hutt. There are concerns smoke emitting from the blaze could be toxic, and as Mariana Johnson reports, firefighters say it could burn for days.
Plumes of dirty grey smoke were seen billowing down the Wellington coast this morning from the Macaulay Metals scrapyard in Seaview. There was confusion in the industrial area as workers tried to get through but were stopped at a cordon on the corner of Seaview Road and Parkside Street. Nigel Hanford was one of them.
They've had a couple of fires, but nothing like this. We're coming over the bridges at Waifa 2 and you can see it from there, but she's looking pretty smoky.
Nigel Hanford says he couldn't smell anything, but people downwind had told him it stunk. Placemaker's employee Brent Grindlay was also caught at the cordon.
Because it's a recycle place, they burn stuff now and then, I think it's to get the copper and wire out. And they've been burning a little bit all week, but that's the first I've seen them like that.
There are concerns the smoke may be toxic because of insulation from old whiteware that is on the 60-metre long pile of scrap metal. Firefighters believe it was a spark from a cutting machine that ignited the blaze. Hutt Valley Fire and Emergency Assistant Area Commander Matthew Abel says fire crews have been working all day to contain the blaze.
This is going to be a long duration fire because it is so deep-seated. The Macaulay Metals digger operators are at the moment working with our firefighters and pulling the metal out so we can get water in.
Matthew Abel says neighbouring buildings have also been evacuated. One employee of Macaulay Metals was sent to hospital suffering from smoke inhalation. Macaulay Metals finance manager Rachel Levis says the employee was immediately discharged and is at home resting. She says the fire was likely started by a lithium battery.
Investigations are still underway, but we would be really surprised if the fire came from refrigeration units. Based on our experience in the industry, we think it's much more likely that it was caused by a lithium battery arcing or sparking.
Rachel Levis says the company is scrupulous when it comes to checking incoming scrap metal, but small objects like lithium batteries from phones can occasionally be missed. A fire and emergency spokesperson says puffs of smoke are still coming off the pile. They are advising anyone that can smell smoke to close their windows and isolate the air conditioning. 3 fire trucks are on the scene and are expected to remain overnight. For Checkpoint, ko Mariana Johnson TNA.
Thanks, Mariana. It's 21 minutes past 6. UK police are believed to have identified the suspected perpetrators of the Novichok attack on Russian former spy Sergei Skripal. The Press Association says officers think several Russians were involved in the attempted murder of the former double agent and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury and are looking for more than one suspect. Now, this news comes, of course, as an inquest is due to open for Dawn Sturgis, who died this month 8 days after apparently coming into contact with the Novichok from the same batch used in the attempted murder of the Skripals in March. Earlier in the program, we had all of this breaking, courtesy of our UK correspondent Adam Gilchrist. But let's go now to our Moscow correspondent. Who knew we had one? It's Jessica the King. Jessica, we're delighted to have you with us. What a treat. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning from Russia.
Good morning. It's just after 9 in the morning there. Has there been a reaction yet?
Well, no reaction yet. I mean, it's being reported on sort of state media channels, but with no sort of official reaction from the Kremlin yet. But over the sort of months of the investigation into the Skripal poisoning and, of course, Dawn Sturgis, there has been sort of the continual complete denial from the Kremlin. So they have always said they've had nothing to do with this. Why would Russia want to poison people in the UK? And they've always said that they're angry that the UK government haven't let them be involved in the investigation. They haven't let them anywhere near the Skripals to talk to them, and they haven't let them anywhere near any of the sort of investigatory process. So that's always been a big bugbear for the Russian government. So I'm sure we'll be getting some pretty strong words from the Kremlin as soon as they do respond to this.
How does the Russian media report a situation where what's coming out of the UK is so at odds with what's coming out of Moscow? What is that's a hell of a balancing act for your colleagues in Russia, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's very difficult when you have sort of complete denial from the Kremlin, and that has been their line from day one. I think it obviously depends on the kind of news sources here in Russia. Many of them are very pro-Putin, pro-Kremlin, in which case they would be supporting the lines of the government and saying that, you know, all of the things that are sort of levelled against Russia are always sort of based on, you know, it's probably Russia. Based on the evidence, we believe, you know, only the roads lead to Russia. But they always say, well, there's no concrete proof. It was the same with the MH17 plane crash. They say it's all this sort of speculation, and they always say there's no real proof. So, of course, there are many media outlets who will, you know, give both sides of the story and give a very balanced point of view, saying, you know, giving the evidence that the UK are providing. But again, it totally depends on which newspapers and which TV channels you watch.
And how does this play out? Well, I hate this term, but with ordinary people, or people on the street. Apologies to everyone who isn't ordinary, because everyone is unique. But what is your average Russian on the street make of it, particularly now in the UK? They are saying quite explicitly, it seems, from the source at Metro Police, that these are Russian nationals. What will be the response to this, Jessica, from people who are consuming all of this as it comes in?
Well, it's quite interesting. I've had a lot of conversations with Russian colleagues and friends about this, and I think that there is a general feeling that, you know, the West kind of likes to blame Russia for a lot of things. Russia is always the bogeyman. Russia is always the bad person. And I think a lot of people are actually quite upset about this because they felt there wasn't really enough concrete evidence to really pin the blame on Russia. And particularly when the Skripals recovered, I think that made people very confused about this whole story. They said, you know, the UK said this was, you know, the deadly nerve agent Novichok, you know, and they, you know, a normal person would sort of be, you know, that would be it. Your life would be over within minutes of coming into contact with this. But then suddenly, you know, they're giving TV interviews, they seem to be fine. And I think that's really kind of put a spanner in the works and made people think, well, actually, maybe our government, the Russian government, has got something here. Maybe we aren't to blame. So I think there's definitely been a certain amount of skepticism over this, but it will be interesting to see what happens now that we've got this sort of a bit more concrete from the UK that they certainly do think their suspects were Russian.
Jessica King, Moscow correspondent. Jessica, thanks so much. We really appreciate talking to you. Jessica joining us live from Moscow as this breaks. So, Metro Police, Met Police in the UK say, well, a source inside the police says, we have our suspects. They are Russian nationals. We believe they are responsible for the Novichok attack on Sergei and Yulia Skripal. All of this breaking in the last hour and a half or so. Just before we go tonight, it's one of the coldest countries on earth, but Sweden is struggling to contain dozens of forest fires raging across the country. Some as far north as the Arctic Circle. More than 40 fires are burning from Lapland in the far north to the southern island of Gotland, and officials say they're spreading quickly. Hot weather and persistent drought are being blamed. Here's the BBC's Andrew Plant.
Wildfire sweeping across forest in Sweden, one of dozens being fought. Firefighters soaking ground that's seen no significant rain in several weeks.
We made a line of water and we stopped the fire so it didn't spread out. Hopefully it won't spread this way now.
Over the dry, sun-baked forest, 2 Italian planes have flown north to help. Each one is capable of dumping 6,000 litres of water each time. Still, Sweden's fires are spreading.
We've done okay the whole day until the wind started, and then we lost some control there. I think it may jump across the road.
The record heat is causing blazes across some of the coldest countries on Earth. Norway, Finland and Russia are facing similar problems. Even the Arctic Circle ablaze in the summer heat. In Sweden, volunteers are helping fight back the flames to try to stop more fire from spreading.
Monday was very hard. It feels like we work in vain. All the time. Fires. Fires. At the end, we had to retreat 3 kilometres because it became too dangerous.
Norwegian helicopters too are flying repeat missions here, scooping buckets of water. One fire, 25 kilometres square, has caused the evacuation of 2 nearby towns. With weather warnings issued across almost the entire country, the wildfires are raging in the summer heat and thriving in a drought that shows no sign of ending.
That from the BBC's Andrew Plant. Just before we go tonight, some breaking news. With the time at 28 minutes past 6, the minister responsible for Pike River re-entry, that's Andrew Little of course, has signed off the Pike River Recovery Agency's concept plan outlining 3 re-entry options. The 3 options for consideration, which will now be developed further, include building a new 2 metre by 2 metre tunnel around 200 metres long into the pit bottom in Stone area, drilling a large diameter borehole and re-entering the main drift as it is with no second means of egress. We've started to develop a detailed plan with full risk assessments, hazard management plans and costings, and we aim to get that back to the Minister for further consideration by the end of October. This is a quote, "A procurement process is well underway to find contractors who will be involved in detailed planning and risk analysis, as well as mine sealing and rehabilitation works at the completion of the project." So what we are seeing here is 3 options have been signed off on as the agency is considering, but this is the most detailed. I think it's important to stress this is the most detailed we have been so far, and it looks like one of these is going to happen. So that is a major breakthrough for the Pike River families who have been campaigning, for almost 8 years for that to happen. So they will be delighted by that. Actually, we might try and talk to Andrew Little about that on Checkpoint tomorrow. A lot of feedback coming in on the lot of independent contractors and the way they stand outside employment law. We're so grateful for it. And those of you who have contacted us as independent contractors, we will be in touch with you. But that's Checkpoint for tonight. On behalf of our really excellent and hard-working team, thank you for being with us. We appreciate the privilege of your company, and we will be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. British police believe they've identified several Russians who were involved in the Novichok nerve agent attack on the Skripals in March. A man charged with the murder of a teenager in Mangere has been remanded in custody until next month after appearing in court today. The number of benefit payments being cut by work and income has dropped by more than 20%, with slightly more than 12,000 benefit sanctions made in the 3 months to June. A Christchurch couple have admitted stealing $500,000 from a government-funded trust for disabled people to finance a lavish lifestyle. And the founder of Auckland's pop-up Globe Theatre has apologised for casting only men in some of its Shakespeare shows later this year. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Hello?
Hello, Alison.
What